A very warm welcome to everyone in the today's lecture of growth hormone physiology. Here we see regulation and action of the growth hormone. Let's begin with the introduction, where we see that growth hormone, which is also called as somatotropin, is a 191 amino acid peptide hormone that is secreted by the anterior pituitary. Next, we see the functions. Function of growth hormone is to stimulate growth via the insulin-like growth factor 1, which is released from the hepatocytes under the stimulation from the growth hormone. And next is regulates metabolism like lipolysis, protein synthesis, and glucose uptake. Next is half-life of the growth hormone. Here we see it has a very short half-life of 20 to 30 minutes, but its effects may last for longer duration, that means for hours and hours. The help of the insulin like growth factor 1, which is released from the hepatocyte under the stimulation of the growth hormone or the somatotropin. Next, we see the synthesis and the secretion of the growth hormone. That means what type of the cell and from where is it secreted and where it is synthesized. And the first source for this is somatotropic cells, which is present in the anterior pituitary. From there, growth hormone is synthesized as well as secreted. And the gene that encode for the growth hormone is growth hormone 1, which is present in the chromosome 17, that is present in the somatotropic cells. And it follows the pulsatile secretion. That means its secretion is peak at a certain duration, and it lowers down at certain conditions, and its peak secretion will be during sleep, especially during the slow wave sleep, that is the stage of the sleep. Next, we see the stimulus for the secretion of the growth hormone. That could be fasting, exercise, stress, hypoglycemia. All these factors contribute for the secretion of the growth hormone. Here you can see that the paraventricular nucleus as well as an arcuate nucleus that is present in the hypothalamus. First, there is an arcuate nucleus which is responsible for the releasing of the growth hormone releasing hormone, and that will stimulate the anterior pituitary, and most probably it will stimulate the somatotrope cell that is present in the anterior pituitary for the secretion of the growth hormone. And next is paraventricular nuclei, from where somatostatin, that is a growth hormone inhibitory hormone, that means that will inhibit the secretion of this growth hormone by stimulating the secretion of growth hormone inhibitory hormone from the hypothalamus, which act on the anterior pituitary and leads to reduced release or secretion of the growth hormone from the anterior pituitary. These things we can appreciate once this secretion get stimulated with the help of growth hormone release hormone. Then this growth hormone, once secreted, that is circulated to various tissues, and this will stimulate the liver for the secretion of insulin like growth factors, and all other biological activities are shown by this insulin like growth factor, unlike on the bone and muscles that we see on the later slides. So there is the regulation of the growth hormone. Mainly the hormonal secretion is regulated by the neuronal mechanism and hormonal mechanism or physiological mechanism, that is also called the feedback mechanism. And feedback mechanism is also of three types, like the ultra short loop and short loop, and next is long loop. Such loops contribute for the regulation of the secretion of various hormone, and in the same way growth hormone secretion is also regulated. Here you can appreciate from the figure that first The growth hormone is secreted from the growth hormone releasing hormone is secreted from this um, arcuate nuclei of the hypothalamus that we saw in the previous slide, and that is stimulated from the stress, exercise, starvation, and acute hypoglycemia as well as aging. Such thing will stimulate the release of the growth hormone releasing hormone, and this will stimulate the uh, you know the somatotropes of the anterior pituitary, and this happen after binding of this growth hormone release hormone on this receptor. And once this is stimulated, that will lead to the activation of this protein kinase A, which later on lead to the synthesis of the growth hormone as well as secretion of the growth hormone from the somatotrope cells in the anterior pituitary. And this uh, growth hormone, which is released once it get stimulated by the growth hormone releasing hormone, then this will send the negative feedback to the hypothalamus for the inhibition of the secretion of the growth hormone releasing hormone, and this is called as the short loop feedback. This is the negative feedback that has been provided by the growth hormone to the hypothalamus for the reduction of the um, release of the growth hormone releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. And next we see that growth hormone also act on the hepatocytes, and once this hepatocyte get stimulated through the JAK-STAT pathway, then there will be the release of the insulin like growth factors and other factors too, and these factors then send stimulus to the pituitary, anterior pituitary, and that will inhibit the release of the growth hormone, and that is called as the short loop. And also it will provide signal to the somatostatin neuron, that is to the paraventricular nucleus of the hypothalamus, to uh, increase the secretion of the growth hormone inhibiting hormone or the somatostatin hormone, which acts on the pituitary, anterior pituitary, and that will inhibit the activation of this protein kinase A, and there will be the reduced synthesis as well as secretion of the growth hormone from the pituitary, anterior pituitary. And this is how the secretion of the growth hormone is regulated. So here you can see the hypothalamic control, that is stimulator growth hormone releasing hormone that can act as a stimulator for the release of the growth hormone, and that act by the GS pathway, that is through the activation of the adenylyl cyclase. And next you can see the ghrelin, that is a hunger hormone, that will also stimulate the release of the growth hormone. And next we see the inhibitors, um, what hormones and the factors that are going to inhibit the secretion of the growth hormone. There is somatostatin, which is being stimulated from the insulin like growth factor 1, which has been released from the hepatocyte once it gets stimulated from the growth hormone that has been released from the pituitary, anterior pituitary. And this somatostatin work by the GI pathway, that will inhibit the activation of adenyl cyclase, and through this pathway that will lead to the inactivation of the protein kinase, and this inactivation lead to the reduced synthesis as well as secretion of the growth hormone. And next is negative feedback that has been sent by the growth hormone itself, that growth hormone once released, that will lead to the increased um, uh, release of the insulin like growth factor 1, and this insulin like growth factor 1 lead to the reduced secretion of growth hormone releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, and this will stimulate the secretion of the somatostatin. So this is the pathway that growth hormone follow for its biological actions, that is JAK-STAT pathway, and this pathway is also used by the various cytokines, growth hormone as well as prolactin and various immunoglobulins, and immunoproteins, interferons, that all work by the Jack-Stent pathway. And you can see in the figure that receptor once bind to the cytokine, once bind to this um, outer domain, that is the domain present outside the membrane. Then after binding, that leads to the dimerization of this Jack, and also phosphorylation. First, they are at distant site, and once these cytokines or prolactin hormone or growth hormone or any other things like the interferons bind to such receptors, then this lead to the dimerization of the Jack, um, and also this leads to the phosphorylation of these tyrosine residues present in this receptor. And once that Jack gets phosphorylated in the tyrosine residues, then the various inactive stat proteins present in the cytosol get incorporated to this phosphorylated Jack, and that again lead to the recruitment of the uh, various receptors, as well as that leads to the activation of this Jack state receptors. And once that get activated, then there will be the dimerization of this state as well, and this dimerized state reaches to the nucleus, and that will bind to the promoter site of the DNA, and that binding lead to the transcription, increased transcription, and thus it um, regulates the various biological activities. Once this transcription is accelerated after binding of this dimerized phosphorylated state to the promoter site, then various genes begin to encode the proteins and enzymes that is necessary for various metabolic activities, and thus this growth hormone work through the signaling pathway for various biological and metabolic activities. Or you can see biological action of the growth hormone through the insulin-like growth factor 1. First, the growth hormone when reaches to the liver, then through the Jack-State pathway lead to the transcription of the gene that encode for the growth hormone like insulin like growth factor 1, and this is the major mediator of the growth. And the this insulin-like growth factor stimulates various activities, and in the bone, this leads to the chondrocyte proliferation, and this happens before the epiphyseal plate closure, and this happens before the puberty, when there is open epiphyseal plate. But once that gets closed, then that will lead to the appositional growth, that is just a blast activity begins to uh, direct in those direction that will begin to increase the width of the bone. So these two types of growth, linear growth as well as appositional growth, are being stimulated with the help of insulin like growth factor 1, which has been produced from the hepatocyte from the stimulation of the growth hormone. And also in the muscle, that will increase the protein synthesis. And in the deficiency of the growth hormone, in especially pediatrics where there is open epiphyseal plate, that chondrocyte proliferation will be halted, and due to that cessation of the chondrocyte proliferation, the short stature will be seen in this pediatrics group, as well as those who are those age groups who have open epiphyseal plate. Such things are seen. And the biological action of the growth hormone, that is the metabolic effects of the growth hormone. You can see that there is various anabolic as well as catabolic action. In the anabolic action, you can see there is the increased protein synthesis, and that help in the muscle growth. And next is catabolic, that means lipolysis, that are free fatty acids. This lipolysis generally occur for the usage of these free fatty acids for gluconeogenesis, so that protein can be used for the growth of the muscle as well as bone and so many other things. And the energy demand for the ATP the lipolysis is done and the glucose intake is also reduced. That is growth hormone show the diabetogenic effect, that is anti-insulin effect, that means that will increases the blood glucose. And next, there is the increase retention of the sodium, potassium and calcium as well. And here you can see the growth hormone uh, as well as insulin like growth factors are doing various activities for this mm, growth, for the growth and the development of the body and the tissues. Growth hormone in the adipose tissues, they are during the fasting state. During the fasting state, this growth hormone when act on the adipose tissues, that leads to the uh, reduced glucose uptake and increased lipolysis, and then there will be the decreased adiposities, that means fat deposition will be decreased in the adipocyte due to increased lipolysis. And next we see this growth hormone when act on the liver, then during the during the fed state, that will lead to the increased RNA synthesis, that is transcription, and increased protein synthesis. But during the fasting state, there will the gluconeogenesis, increased gluconeogenesis, and also, during the fed state, there will be the increased insulin-like growth factor binding protein and increased synthesis of the insulin-like growth factors. And this increased synthesis of the insulin-like growth factor 1 lead to the protein synthesis, RNA synthesis, DNA synthesis, and the cell size increases the cell size as well as the number. That means hypertrophy and hyperplasia that occurs in the bone, heart, and lung during the fed state, and thus there will be the increased organ size and the organ function. And this also happen in the kidney, pancreas, intestine, islets, parathyroids, skin, connective tissues. And next we see when the growth hormone acts on the muscle at the fasting state, then there will be the decreased glucose uptake by the muscular tissues, and during the fed state, there will be the increased uptake of the amino acid and increased protein synthesis. Thus, this will increase the lean body mass. Lean body mass during the fed stage, and here the adiposity is decreased during the fasting state. And also the insulin growth factor 1 act on the chondrocyte, and the growth hormone itself also act on the chondrocyte, and they both increase the amino acid uptake, protein synthesis and RNA synthesis, DNA synthesis, as well as increased collagen synthesis and chondroitin sulfate, and in hypertrophy hyperplasia the fed state, and this will increase the linear growth. Next we see the summary of the signaling pathway of the growth hormone. Then the growth hormone bind to the extracellular domain that induces the receptor dimerization that we saw earlier, that Jack is far apart from each other. And once the growth hormone bind to the extracellular domain, then there will be the dimerization of the Jack. And after the dimerization, there will be the activation of the intercellular domain and binding of the free moving Jack molecules to the intercellular domain, and then the activated Jack phosphorylates the tyrosine residues on the receptors, and then Jack binds to the stat, and the tyrosine residues of the stat also get phosphorylated by the Jack. Next we see this phosphorylated stat dimerizes and dissociate from the receptor, and then that get translocated to the nucleus for its activities, and in the nucleus that regulates the transcription of the target genes by binding to the promoter sites, and then that will increase the transcription of the gene for the various proteins that are required for the growth of the body. These things we study under the growth hormone physiology. Thank you.